Welcome back to the TPS podcast. TPS stands for trillions per second, named after the book. Today we'll do a deep dive on a very interesting old blog post by the TPS author. It's a conversation between C4 Chaos and his hardcore Dharma teacher, Shinzen Young, about enlightenment and psychopathy. Let's explore this blast from the past and dive right in.
Yeah, to really set the stage here, I want you to picture a Zen master meditating on a remote mountain peak. Right. Perfectly calm, utterly detached, just this absolute picture of serenity.
Right, the classic image.
Exactly. But now I want you to picture a ruthless, cold-blooded serial killer. Or, like a hyper-manipulative corporate sociopath.
Okay. That's a bit of a pivot.
It is. But what if I told you that, computationally speaking, their brains are actually entirely capable of running the exact same optimization software?
Wow. I mean, that is exactly the horrifying and really counterintuitive premise we are exploring today. And to our listeners out there, if you've ever looked at a supposedly, enlightened spiritual leader or a famous self-help guru or even just a highly successful laser-focused tech CEO and wondered, how can someone so brilliant, so calm, and so seemingly optimized still be such an absolute jerk?
Yeah, the classic question.
Right. Well, this deep dive is going to give you the exact mathematical and architectural answer to that.
We are stepping way back into the project's timeline today, like back to May 2011.
Oh, wow. So way back.
Yeah, this is long before the modern trillions per second architecture was fully compiled. It's long before the Silicon Sutra was published, and critically, long before the author started using AI code processors to help synthesize this massive framework.
Right. It was just human brains back then.
Exactly. But what we find in this specific 2011 time capsule is the absolute origin story of one of the most crucial patches in the entire TPS architecture. We are looking at the system's most dangerous vulnerability. The developers call it the Enlightened Psychopath Bug.
The Enlightened Psychopath Bug, which is just an incredible name, by the way.
It really is.
And what makes this deep dive so compelling is tracking how the Centaur team, which is the human author C4 Chaos, working alongside his AI co-processors years later, how they eventually solved this massive bug.
Yeah.
Because, spoiler alert, they didn't solve it with moral philosophy or, religious dogma.
No, because you can't debate a psychopath into being a good person. That just doesn't work.
Exactly, you can't. So they solved it using strict, unbreakable thermodynamics and this thing they call the white hat EULA.
But to understand the cure, we first have to thoroughly understand the disease. And that takes us directly to that May 2011 blog post by C4 Chaos.
Right, let's get into the context of that era.
Yeah, it is vital to understand the historical context here. So in 2011, there was this burgeoning movement on the internet called Hardcore Dharma.
Hardcore Dharma. Sounds intense.
It was. These were practitioners who were stripping away all the cultural, religious, and mystical baggage of traditional Buddhism. They weren't into the woo-woo stuff. They were treating meditation like an open-source hacking manual for the human brain.
It was a fascinating era because it wasn't about, sitting in a circle, burning sage, and feeling warm, fuzzy thoughts about humanity.
Not at all.
It was highly technical. And into this hyper-technical, pragmatic community, C4 Chaos casually drops this absolute digital grenade of a question onto his Twitter timeline.
Just lobs it right in there.
Yeah. He simply asks, is it possible for a psychopath to be enlightened?
It is such a brilliant provocation. And the reactions he documented in his blog post were wonderfully mixed. I mean, highly indicative of the massive confusion surrounding this topic, even among advanced practitioners.
Oh, I bet people lost their minds.
Totally. You had some people instantly reacting with moral revulsion, saying, absolutely not, that's a contradiction in terms, enlightenment is goodness.
Right, the traditional view.
Yeah. And then you had others taking a more philosophical route, arguing, well, true enlightenment requires genuine responsiveness and connection to others, which a psychopath fundamentally lacks, so no.
But then you had this third camp, right?
Exactly, the hardcore technical practitioners. And they looked at the pure mechanics of it and said, wait a minute, there is actually no strict, required correlation between achieving the cognitive state of enlightenment and conforming to conventional moral behavior. So maybe.
Which is wild, and this is where C4 Chaos formulates his highly specific mechanical premise. He wasn't just trolling for engagement here.
No, he was deadly serious.
Right. And he starts by defining his terms, which is crucial, because when he says classical enlightenment, he's not talking about becoming an omnipotent, glowing deity who floats above the earth.
Right, he's talking about stream entry.
Let's translate that for the listener really quick. In the legacy code of Theravada Buddhism, stream entry is the first major stage of awakening. It's what the TPS manual cheekily calls enlightenment leap.
Yeah, enlightenmently, I love that term.
It's achieving initial root access to the operating system of the mind. It is the specific moment a user realizes that the self, that voice in your head narrating your life, is an illusion.
Yes. The TPS framework calls this realizing the null pointer.
Exactly. And here is C4 Chaos's brilliant, if slightly disturbing, hypothesis from 2011. He suggests that because psychopaths inherently lack empathy, remorse, and guilt, they might actually have a massive unfair advantage when it comes to the mechanical practices of meditation.
Yes. What's fascinating here is how he completely separates mechanical skill from moral development.
I remember reading this for the first time and just stopping in my tracks like, wait, a psychopath has an advantage in meditation. That completely flips the script on what we think meditation is supposed to be.
It really does.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. How does a lack of empathy translate to a meditative advantage?
Well, let's look at it purely in terms of cognitive resource management. Mental RAM.
Okay, mental RAM.
Yeah. In the hardcore Dharma lineage, meditation is a rigorous technical process of isolating sensory variables. It requires extreme concentration, high-resolution sensory clarity, and unshakable equanimity.
Which are not easy to maintain.
Not at all. The TPS framework refactors these as hardware protocols. So concentration is like overclocking the processor, clarity is data logging every sensory packet at a high frame rate, and equanimity is system stability or, not crashing when the data gets intense.
Okay, so if I'm a normal, empathetic person trying to execute these protocols, what actually happens? I sit down on my cushion, I try to focus on my breath, and immediately my brain is flooded with background processes.
No, absolutely.
I feel a pang of guilt because I snapped at my spouse this morning. I feel low-grade anxiety about an email I need to send to my boss. I feel empathy and sadness because my friend's dog is sick. From a system perspective, these are all cognitive resource hogs.
That's exactly what they are.
They are background apps consuming massive amounts of CPU cycles and battery life, which constantly breaks my concentration.
Exactly. The human emotional spectrum is incredibly computationally expensive.
Yeah.
But a true psychopath, their operating system literally does not run those empathy or guilt subroutines.
Wow.
Yeah, their biological hardware is missing those specific empathy drivers.
Yeah.
They are neurologically unburdened by the friction of human connection and moral second-guessing.
So if a psychopath treats meditation not as a moral or spiritual journey, but simply as a cold, mechanical skill like, mastering high-level calculus or learning a complex programming language, they can dedicate 100% of their CPU to the mechanical execution of the technique.
Totally. They don't get distracted by guilt because they physically don't feel guilt.
They can achieve the mechanical state of root access without ever developing a shred of empathy. They can use raw, brute force concentration to see the underlying code of reality.
Right.
They can realize the self is a construct, but they use that profound realization purely for their own operational efficiency to make themselves more focused and unflappable.
That's the terrifying part.
Okay, let's unpack this. Wait, hold on. This challenges a massive, fundamental assumption most of us have about spirituality.
Oh, it completely shatters it.
Are we saying that the Buddhist precepts, like the rules about not lying, not stealing, not harming others, are not cosmic, universal laws of good and evil? They're just system guidelines.
In the raw mechanical view of the simulation architecture, yes. The TPS lexicon calls morality, or what the legacy code calls sila, a firewall.
A firewall. Interesting.
Yeah, think about why a normal person shouldn't lie or steal. If you steal something, you have to look over your shoulder, you worry about getting caught, you feel guilty. Doing so opens massive ports in your mind for malware, anxiety, paranoia, regret.
Right, you're opening yourself up to a cyber attack on your own peace of mind.
Exactly. This causes mental agitation, eats up your mental RAM, and absolutely ruins your concentration.
But if a psychopath literally feels no agitation, no fear, and no guilt when they lie to someone's face or ruin someone's life, their firewall isn't breached by those actions. Their heart rate doesn't even elevate.
Nope. They can maintain perfect system stability while doing terrible things.
That is the terrifying reality. The technical skill of hacking the mind is entirely independent of the hacker's moral intent.
Totally.
It's exactly like giving a master hacker the keys to the corporate mainframe. Just because they understand the system architecture flawlessly, just because they can write elegant, bug-free code, doesn't mean they aren't going to install a massive ransomware package and hold the company hostage.
That is a perfect analogy.
You can be a genius at the keyboard and still be a completely malicious actor. The skill does not dictate the morality.
C4 Chaos actually uses similar computer lingo in his 2011 email exchange. He uses the old programming adage, garbage in, garbage out.
Classic.
Right. A psychopath who achieves stream entry is still fundamentally a psychopath. They are just a highly focused, highly optimized psychopath who now possesses an incredibly deep, almost superhuman understanding of human psychology and the illusion of the self.
Which makes them so much more dangerous.
Exactly. That makes them potentially much more dangerous.
Yeah.
They can manipulate people with surgical precision because they see the strings attached to everyone else's egos while knowing their own ego is just a tool.
And he doesn't just theorize about this. He brings up a wild historical example from the original legacy texts to prove that this isn't just a modern thought experiment.
Yeah, this part blew my mind.
He mentions Angulimala. For those listening who aren't deep into Buddhist lore, Angulimala was literally a serial killer during the time of the historical Buddha. His name translates to finger garland because he systematically murdered people and wore their severed fingers on a necklace to keep track of his kill count.
I mean, he was the definition of an extreme, antisocial, violent personality, a textbook psychopath of the ancient world.
Exactly. And yet this mass murderer encountered the Buddha, was taught the mechanical techniques of mindfulness and concentration, and actually attained arhatship, which is the absolute highest level of classical enlightenment in that tradition.
Right, total liberation.
He achieved total liberation. It completely shatters the New Age illusion that only soft, gentle, deeply empathetic people who drink herbal tea can access these profound states of consciousness. It proves there is a documented, thousands of years old precedent for extreme psychopaths succeeding in these hardcore practices.
Because the physics of the mind are completely neutral.
Neutral.
Yeah, think about gravity. Gravity doesn't care if you are a saint trying to save a child or a serial killer dropping a rock on someone's head. Gravity operates exactly the same way. Similarly, if you execute the attention protocols perfectly, the mind achieves root access. It does not screen for morality at the door.
That is so profound, but seeing this glaring vulnerability in the system, C4 Chaos didn't just leave this as a theoretical debate on a forum. He took this exact hypothesis directly to the heavy hitter of the pragmatic Dharma world.
Yes, he did.
He emailed his teacher, Shinzen Young, a man famous for stripping away the mysticism and translating mystical states into algorithmic mathematical science. And Shinzen's response to this question led to a profound revelation about a concept he calls uneven growth.
Shinzen Young's email response from May 24, 2011 is just a masterclass in pragmatic analysis. He doesn't dismiss C4 Chaos's provocative question, and he doesn't clutch his pearls.
Right, he addresses it head-on.
Instead, he starts by providing a brilliantly concise equation for what enlightenment actually entails. He says, if forced to grossly oversimplify, enlightenment is a two-part equation. It's seeing beyond the self plus the improving the self.
I love that. It's a clean two-variable formula. Seeing beyond the self plus improving the self.
And applying that formula, Shinzen offers his diagnosis of the enlightened psychopath. He completely agrees with C4 Chaos's underlying premise. A psychopath would have absolutely no problem with the first variable, seeing beyond the self.
Right, because of that lack of emotional friction we talked about?
Exactly. Because of their lack of emotional friction, they could easily execute the mechanical protocols to realize the null pointer. But they would heavily, perhaps permanently, struggle with the second variable, improving the self.
Because improving the self requires acknowledging your impact on others. It requires caring about the suffering of others, which requires the empathy hardware they fundamentally lack.
Precisely. Shinzen states that enlightenment is a vector-valued function. Now, let's break that down for a layperson because it's a vital mathematical analogy.
Yeah, let's do that.
When most people think of personal growth, they think of a simple 2D line graph. You start at the bottom left, and as you get more spiritual, the line goes up to the top right. You get more peaceful, more kind, and more insightful all at the same time.
Right, the escalator model of spirituality. You just ride it to the top.
Exactly. But a vector-valued function means you are plotting multiple different lines across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Your mind is not a single line, it's a multi-dimensional space.
Okay, I'm following.
And because it's multidimensional, people can experience wildly uneven growth. You can have your concentration and insight vectors shoot straight up off the charts, piercing the ceiling, but your empathy and morality vectors can remain absolutely flatlined at zero.
Which perfectly explains a very dark phenomenon that both C4 Chaos and Shinzen discuss in their email exchange, the dark side of enlightenment, and specifically the crazy wisdom excuse.
Oh, this is such a huge issue.
We see this so often in spiritual communities. You have these supposedly enlightened teachers who have profound insights. They can meditate for days. They emanate this intense aura of peace. But then behind closed doors, they act like absolute jerks, manipulators, or out with sexual predators.
And when they are finally called out on their abusive behavior, how do they or their loyal followers justify it?
They use their enlightenment to excuse it. They claim they are operating on a higher plane of crazy wisdom. They say things like, oh, the guru's abuse is actually just a high-level teaching designed to shatter your ego. You're just too attached to conventional morality to understand his cosmic methods. It's incredibly insidious.
It's disgusting, honestly. Crazy wisdom is almost always a spiritualized cover story for unchecked narcissism and uneven growth. They have the insight vector maxed out and the morality vector at zero. And Shinzen zeroes in on exactly why this uneven growth metastasizes into abuse. He warns about the critical danger of lacking robust feedback structures.
What does he mean by that in a practical sense?
He points out that many teachers go off the deep end and become abusive because they lack peers. In the legacy code, this peer group is called a sangha.
Right, the community.
Yeah, but the sangha isn't just a nice community group where you drink tea and chat. Structurally, it is a diagnostic mirror. But these teachers achieve a high level of system optimization, they get a taste of root access, and then they isolate themselves at the very top of a rigid hierarchy where no one is allowed to question them.
If we look at this through the lens of the TPS manual, it makes total sense. The Sangha is a peer-to-peer network designed for error correction. If you disconnect your local node from the network, you lose your diagnostic mirrors.
Exactly.
You start compiling errors. Maybe you get a little greedy, a little arrogant, and you don't even know it because everyone around you is a subordinate, just nodding, smiling, and agreeing with your corrupted output.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this 2011 email exchange is monumental for the TPS project. It is the architectural seed for what the framework decades later officially defines as the Black Hat Trap.
The Black Hat Trap.
Yes. The Black Hat Trap is the catastrophic state of achieving immense system, power-deep insight, accessing the server-side code of reality, but deliberately uninstalling the network's immune system. You gain the power of the code, but you strip away the protective protocols of compassion and human connection.
And if you're listening to this and thinking, well, I don't hang out at ashram, so this doesn't apply to me, think again. Let's pull this right back into daily life.
Good point.
This dynamic isn't reserved for monks on a mountain. Think about how often we see this exact same uneven growth in the tech world or on Wall Street or in high-pressure corporate environments.
Modern secular manifestation of this is everywhere.
You have these founders, these high-level CEOs, who possess incredible optimization skills. They have what Shinzen calls seeing beyond the self in the sense of absolute flow state hyperfocus. They can deconstruct complex global markets. They can visualize multi-decade logistical roadmaps. They can completely lose themselves in the flow state of coding or building a massive company. They achieve a secular form of root access. They see the matrix of capitalism.
But they pair that hyper-focused optimization with absolute zero empathy.
Zero.
They view their employees as disposable biological RAM. They view competitors as obstacles to be crushed without a second thought. They are running the exact same uneven vector-valued function Shinzen warned about. Massive mechanical output, zero moral development.
Right. Or even just the guy at the yoga retreat who uses his mindfulness training to aggressively cut people off in line for smoothies because he's living purely in the present moment.
Oh man, I've met that guy.
We all have. It's the same bug, just different scales.
Yeah.
And in the devlog, C4 Chaos specifically dedicates this exploration to a man named Bill Hamilton, referencing his book Saints and Psychopaths. Who was Bill Hamilton, and why is that book so relevant here?
Well, Bill Hamilton was a legendary, somewhat unsung hero in the hardcore Dharma movement. He was one of the first Westerners to rigorously and unflinchingly document how advanced meditative states do not automatically cure underlying psychological pathology.
Wow, so he was calling this out early.
Very early. His book, Saints and Psychopaths, essentially argued that you can be an absolute meditation master, capable of profound states of bliss and insight, and still be an absolute psychological mess. You can be a saint on the cushion and a psychopath in the kitchen.
It's a lineage of pragmatic truth-telling. But here is the critical transition in our deep dive today. Well, that 2011 email exchange brilliantly identified the psychological problem and gave it a name, uneven growth. It was still essentially a philosophical and psychological discussion.
Right, it was theory.
It wasn't until years later that this was translated into actual executable system architecture.
This is where we fast forward to the modern day of the TPS project timeline, specifically Devlog 25. The Centaur team, which is C4 Chaos, working directly with highly advanced AI coprocessors, opens up the 2011 archives.
And why use AI for this?
Because human beings naturally inject moral bias into these discussions. We get emotional about psychopaths. The AI doesn't. The AI can look at the raw mechanics of consciousness without moral panic.
That makes a lot of sense. So they feed the old emails between C4 Chaos and Shinzen Young, along with Bill Hamilton's observations, and critically, Dr. Robert Hare's famous psychopathy checklist directly into the AI parsing engine.
Yep.
They formally run a diagnostic to create what cybersecurity experts call a threat model.
A threat model is exactly what it sounds like. Before you can patch a vulnerability in a system, you have to define exactly how an attacker exploits it. The Centaur team took Hare's psychological profile and translated it into native TPS architecture.
Let's actually look at Hare's psychopathy checklist for a second and see how the AI mapped it. Hare's list includes traits like superficial charm, grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological lying, lack of remorse or guilt, and shallow affect. How does the Centaur team map that to a meditation master?
They mapped it perfectly to a specific vulnerability called a targeted hack. Let's take shallow affect and lack of remorse. In a normal person, those are signs of severe emotional blunting.
Right.
But to an advanced meditator who has achieved the null pointer, the realization that the self is an illusion, those traits mimic high-level equanimity. If you don't believe yourself is real, why would you feel remorse for what your avatar does? Why would you have deep, turbulent emotions?
That is terrifying. The psychopath's natural pathology perfectly mimics the highest goals of spiritual detachment. So they define the exact vulnerability. The psychopathic user manages to execute the targeted hack. They realize the null pointer.
Yeah.
They see the raw flashing code of reality without the filter of their personal narrative. But here is the fatal error. Upon realizing the null pointer, the enlightened psychopath actively aborts the installation of the quad-core kernel.
We need to explain the quad-core kernel. This is the TPS framework's technological translation of the legacy Brahma Viharas, the four divine abodes of Buddhism. In the TPS system, they are the essential, non-negotiable empathy drivers.
Let's list them. Core 1 is open ports, which is love or loving kindness.
Core 2 is error correction, which is compassion.
Core 3 is signal amplification, which is sympathetic joy, being happy for others.
And Core 4 is system stability, which is equanimity.
So imagine the psychopathic node. They get the immense power of root access. They see the raw code. But because their biological hardware lacks the capacity for empathy, they look at those four cores and say, that looks like bloatware. I don't need compassion. It'll just slow down my processing speed.
Exactly.
So they deliberately cancel the download of those drivers. They are now running a deeply, dangerously unbalanced system. They have the administrative privileges of the source code, but they are still running the local malware of extreme narcissism.
It's the ultimate bad build.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I'm struggling with something here, and I know listeners will be too. It's a paradox.
Okay, what is it?
If this person has successfully realized there is no self, if they have seen the null pointer and logically understand that their ego is an illusion, why are they still acting selfishly? How can you be fiercely selfish if you know for a fact the self doesn't exist?
That is the very crux of the black hat trap. Realizing the self is a cognitive illusion does not automatically delete the deeply ingrained biological self-preservation habits built into the physical hardware.
Ah, right, the animal body.
Yes, the animal body still wants food, status, power, and dopamine. If you don't actively install the compassion drivers to override those animal instincts, your system defaults back to localized greed. You just have vastly upgraded processing power to execute that greed.
Let me see if I can translate this into a real-world analogy. It's like someone taking an advanced high-level economics class and realizing that the concept of money is entirely a social construct.
Okay, yeah.
They look at the global financial matrix and realize that a $100 bill is just a piece of paper with zero intrinsic value. It's a shared hallucination we all just agree to believe in. They have achieved the null pointer of economics.
Yes, they see through the illusions.
Exactly. But then, armed with this profound, liberating realization that money is entirely fake, they decide to rob a bank anyway. Why?
Mhm.
Because their local physical avatar still really wants to buy a luxury yacht. They know the macroeconomic system is an illusion, but they coldly and calculatedly exploit that illusion to feed their local desires. They weaponize the insight.
That is a brilliant analogy. And again, to bring this back to the listener's daily life, we see micro versions of this weaponized insight constantly. Think about the massive modern rise of what we call therapy speak on social
Oh,
media.
absolutely. It's everywhere.
We've all met people who learn the complex terminology of psychology or mindfulness, words like boundaries, gaslighting, triggering, holding space, or trauma responses.
Right.
And instead of using those profound concepts to heal themselves, build self-awareness, and connect authentically with others, they weaponize them. They use the language of psychological liberation to manipulate their partners, avoid taking any accountability for their toxic behavior, and build a stronger, more impenetrable ego defense.
Oh, man.
They'll say, I'm not being cruel to you. I'm just aggressively enforcing my boundaries to protect my peace.
Yes. The enlightened psychopath is simply the ultimate system-level manifestation of that weaponized therapy speak. They are using the raw mechanics of spiritual liberation to become an untouchable superpredator.
Which brings us to a massive scaling problem and the ultimate terrifying question for the Centaur team. If an enlightened psychopath achieves true root access, if they figure out how to manipulate the source code of reality with absolute focus, and they have absolutely no moral firewall to hold them back, what stops them from taking over the entire network?
That's the million-dollar question.
If you can't appeal to their conscience because they don't have one, what prevents a black hat hacker from becoming a literal god in the simulation?
And this is where the deep dive takes a massive pivot. Because the Centaur team realized you cannot stop a system-level hacker with a moral argument. You can't sit a psychopath down and say, hey, please don't manipulate millions of people, it's bad. Because they literally do not process the concept of bad.
Right, they just don't get it.
They only process efficient and inefficient.
Precisely. So the Centaur team completely abandoned ethics. They answered the question not with morality, but with the strict, unbreakable laws of thermodynamics.
Let's unpack this pivot. The Centaur team looks at the system architecture and they create what they call the mathematical loss function.
Let's define that for the non-programmers. In machine learning, a loss function is a mathematical method of evaluating how well an algorithm models the given data. If an AI's predictions deviate too much from actual optimal results, the loss function outputs a high number, representing a penalty or an error rate. The system then automatically adjusts its weights to minimize that loss. The Centaur team applied this exact, strict computational logic to human behavior and consciousness.
Wait, hold on. You're losing me a bit here. Are we saying the universe is literally running math on us? Because that sounds incredibly cold and deterministic. It sounds like we're just cogs in a giant calculator.
It sounds cold,
Huh.
but it's actually profoundly liberating because it removes the need for a cosmic punisher. The Centaur team's system log conclusion is incredibly reassuring. Using this thermodynamic loss function, they mathematically proved that it is physically, computationally impossible for the psychopathic node to achieve permanent global dominance.
Really?
The black hat hacker cannot win. The math simply does not allow it.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of that. Why is it physically impossible if they have all this processing power and no moral limitations? Why do they fail?
It all comes down to the strict hardware constraints of that missing quad-core kernel. Remember, the psychopath actively aborted the installation of Core 2, which is error correction or compassion, and they critically lack Core 4, which is system stability or equanimity.
Okay, so without compassion and equanimity, what actually happens to their local processor?
It cannot cool itself.
Wow. Let's dig into the biological mechanics of that. What does that actually mean for a human brain?
Let's look at the physical act of lying or manipulating. When a normal person or a psychopath tells a lie to manipulate the peer-to-peer network, say, a toxic CEO lying to their board of directors, or a cult leader guarding a massive secret, that lie requires computational energy.
Right, you have to keep track of it.
Exactly. You have to remember who you told what. You have to constantly monitor the network for threats to your story. You have to hyperactivate your default mode network to simulate other people's perceptions of you.
And all of that cognitive load generates physical system heat. It spikes cortisol. It keeps the amygdala engaged. It's a massive drain on the body's resources.
Exactly. Now, for a healthy node, equanimity core 4 acts as a literal neurological heatsink. Equanimity downregulates the amygdala. Compassion Core 2 connects you to the network, allowing you to share the cognitive load through honest, frictionless connection.
Ah, I see.
But the enlightened psychopath doesn't have those heat sinks. They have no way to disperse the thermal load they are generating through their constant friction-heavy manipulation of reality.
So this leads to a state known in engineering as thermal runaway. I know a bit about this from building computers. Thermal runaway is a terrifying feedback loop. It's a situation where an increase in temperature changes the conditions in a way that causes a further increase in temperature.
Right, just bills and bills.
It compounds exponentially until there is a destructive result.
And we see this exact psychological thermal runaway in narcissistic leaders all the time.
Okay.
The psychopath's friction compounds. They lie to cover a previous lie, which requires significantly more processing power to track. That generates more heat, which makes their nervous system paranoid.
And then what?
That paranoia causes them to lash out and alienate allies, which requires them to exert even more forceful control over the network, generating even more heat.
And the inevitable result of this thermal runaway is catastrophic system failure. It manifests in the real world in very predictable ways. It manifests as organizational collapse. The toxic CEO's company goes bankrupt under the weight of their ego, or the guru's cult violently implodes.
Yep.
It manifests as mental fragmentation. They descend into clinical paranoia, psychosis, or isolation. Or it manifests as absolute physiological burnout. Their biological chassis just gives out from the cortisol load.
So when you asked earlier if this was deterministic,
I see it now. You're saying being evil is literally just a calculation error. In the strict logic of the TPS framework, malice is mathematically inefficient. It is an unsustainable allocation of system resources that inevitably destroys the hardware running it.
it's exactly like overclocking a massive custom-built gaming PC. You bypass all the factory safety limits to force the processor to run at maximum record-breaking frame rates. But because you are arrogant, you intentionally unplug the liquid cooling system.
Why would anyone do that?
Well, you think the cooling system is weak or unnecessary bloatware. For a few glorious minutes, you have the fastest, most powerful computer in the world. You are absolutely dominating the game.
And then, because there is no heat sink to disperse the thermal load, the motherboard literally melts into a tile of smoking slag. The sheer power destroys the vessel.
That is the exact thermodynamic reality of the enlightened psychopath. They overclock their concentration, but without the liquid cooling of equanimity and compassion, their biological chassis eventually melts down. And this realization, this changes everything, because this thermodynamic model completely redefines one of the oldest concepts in human history.
Oh, this is huge. Let's explore that.
It redefines karma.
Karma.
Yeah, in the legacy UI of most religions, people treat karma like a cosmic judge. They think there is a deity sitting on a cloud with a giant ledger, tallying up your sins and your good deeds and dispensing personalized punishments. It feels like a moral judgment, which makes people defensive, guilty, or resentful.
But in the TPS framework, karma isn't a judge with a gavel. Karma is just the algorithm. It is the mathematical loss function.
Exactly. Bad behavior, selfishness, manipulation, cruelty generate system heat. That is not a moral failing. It is a literal law of physics within the simulation. Heat, if not dispersed through compassion and connection, destroys the local hardware.
Wow.
It's not a punishment from God. It's an automatic, physics-based self-correction mechanism built directly into the network architecture. The universe doesn't have to single out and punish the psychopath. The psychopath's own thermal inefficiency destroys them from the inside out.
That is deeply comforting on a macro level. Knowing that a psychopathic node will inevitably mathematically burn itself out provides a lot of peace of mind. It proves the universe bends towards stability.
It does.
But let's be real here. While we are sitting around waiting for that toxic CEO or that manipulative guru to achieve thermal runaway and meltdown, they are still causing massive collateral damage to the network.
Oh, massive.
They are ruining companies, destroying families, and deeply hurting people in the meantime.
They are. The local short-term damage can be devastating before the system halt finally occurs.
Which brings us to the final, most crucial piece of the TPS architecture. How does the framework proactively defend against this collateral damage? If the physics engine eventually takes out the trash, What are the rest of the healthy nodes supposed to do while the trash is burning?
This is where the Centaur team deployed the ultimate patch. They realized that if you are going to hand users the manual to achieve root access, if you're going to teach people these powerful hardcore Dharma techniques, you absolutely must bundle it with a mandatory safety protocol.
Right, you can't just hand out weapons.
Exactly. You cannot distribute military-grade hacking tools without a strict license agreement. So they created the White Hat Protocol V4.1, which the TPS community refers to as the End User License Agreement, or the EULA.
And true to the TPS ethos of refactoring ancient wisdom, they didn't invent this legal contract out of thin air. They took one of the most beautiful, ancient, and honestly somewhat intimidating concepts from legacy code, and they updated it. They took the ancient Bodhisattva vow.
Let's contextualize that for the listener because it's important. The Bodhisattva vow, primarily in Mahayana Buddhism, is the ultimate pledge of altruism. It is the vow to attain enlightenment not just for your own personal escape from suffering, but for the ultimate liberation of all sentient beings.
That is big commitment.
Huge. You literally vow to stay in the cycle of rebirth, returning again and again until every single being is saved. It is a vow of infinite, exhausting compassion.
But again, to a modern secular user in 2026, that can sound very mystical, very religious, and frankly, impossibly self-sacrificing. It sounds like martyrdom.
It really does.
So the Centaur team refactored the Bodhisattva vow into a CC BY-SA 4.0 open source license for thermodynamic alignment.
They translated ancient poetry into a binding software contract. And the specific acceptance conditions of this EULA are brilliant, because they systematically counter every single vulnerability of the psychopathic threat model we just mapped out. Let's break down the exact terms of service you're agreeing to when you execute the TPS protocol and seek root access.
Let's do it. Term number 1 of the EULA. You must run the quad-core kernel at full clock speed or your build is invalid.
Meaning, you cannot cherry-pick concentration and leave out compassion. You cannot optimize for insight and leave your morality vector at 0. The system requires all 4 cores: love, compassion, joy, equanimity, to function sustainably.
And if you don't,
if you try to disable the empathy drivers to save processing power for your local ego, your user license is immediately flagged and you are subjected to the thermodynamic loss function.
Term number 2. Your local chassis, meaning your physical body and your egoic mind, is just a temporary read-write terminal.
This specific term directly attacks and destroys the narcissist's core delusion. The black hat hacker, the psychopath, fundamentally believes their specific terminal, their avatar, is the absolute center of the universe.
Naturally.
The EULA forces you to acknowledge that your body is just a temporary, highly fragile piece of hardware temporarily plugged into a massive eternal network. You are a single node. You are not the server.
Which flows perfectly into term number 3, and this is the one that really blew my mind. Server-side data integrity supersedes local hardware preservation.
This is the cold thermodynamic translation of pure altruism. If protecting the health of the overall network, the server side, requires your local node to take on a heavier processing load or suffer a setback or even sacrifice its own local advantage, you must do it.
Wow.
The health of the whole is mathematically and computationally more important than the success of the part.
So what does this all mean? Let's pause and really look at what this means, because this completely flips the entire modern self-help industry on its head. Think about it.
Oh, totally backwards.
The entire wellness and self-improvement movement right now is built entirely on optimizing the local hardware. Protect your peace, build your wealth, optimize your morning routine, cut out toxic people so you can thrive.
Very hyper-individualistic.
It is. But the White Hat EULA explicitly states that server-side data is more important than your local hardware. The goal of enlightenment isn't to make you an invincible, untouchable superhero who floats above the fray. It's the ultimate anti-narcissism contract. You are optimizing your node specifically so that you don't drag down the rest of the network.
That is a profound distinction.
Yeah.
You aren't getting enlightened for you. You are getting enlightened so you stop being a resource hog on the network. And to enforce this, the EULA introduces a brilliant structural mechanism called the Sangha mirror.
The Sangha mirror.
Right? Remember back in 2011 when Shinzen Young warned about the lack of robust feedback structures for those rogue, crazy wisdom teachers?
Yes, the gurus who isolate themselves at the top of the pyramid so no one can criticize them.
The Centaur team solved this architecturally. They turned the community, the Sangha, the peer-to-peer cluster, into a literal active heatsink and a reflective mirror. The EULA explicitly states that if you start acting like a black hat, if you start generating network heat through manipulation, cruelty, or selfishness, The PDP cluster is obligated to reflect that heat right back at you.
So the community doesn't just passively tolerate the bad behavior.
Exactly. The network will actively reject your malicious code. It forces the psychopathic node to make a choice. Either immediately compile the missing compassion cores to reintegrate with the network, or face absolute isolation and accelerated thermal shutdown. The community itself becomes the firewall.
And the final term of the EULA, you cannot use dev tools for egoic gain.
The dev tools.
Yeah, in the legacy code, dev tools are called cities. These are the intermediate realms of power, deep flow states, psychic visions, or intense charisma that often arise during deep meditation. This is the hard block against the black hat trap. If you get high on your own supply, if you use your hyper-focus to get rich at the expense of others, your save file corrupts.
And we have to emphasize that this isn't just a gentleman's agreement or an honor system. It's written into the fundamental code of the simulation. The devlog discusses a concept called the signature block,
How does that work?
achieving checkpoint 6 in the TPS roadmap, which is attaining root access, or stream entry acts as your permanent digital signature on this contract. The moment you achieve that level of insight into the null pointer, you are thermodynamically bound to the terms.
You can't opt out?
Nope. The system automatically auto-compiles the quad-core kernel on every subsequent optimization loop. You are forced to continuously converge on zero lag, which means you are mathematically forced to become more compassionate, or the system violently crashes you out.
It is absolutely stunning. As we begin to wrap up this deep dive, when you zoom out and look at the trajectory we just tracked over the last hour, it is mind-blowing. We started with a theoretical, almost flippant conversation on Twitter in 2011. Can a psychopath meditate?
Yeah, quite journey.
We moved to Shinzen Young's elegant vector-based diagnosis of uneven growth. And we watched that evolve through the Centaur team's brilliant human-AI collaboration years later into a mathematically rigorous, structurally sound safety protocol. They created a thermodynamic proof that a lack of empathy literally causes biological and systemic thermal runaway, culminating in the protective white hat EULA. It's not just a theory, it's a blueprint for the survival of human and potentially artificial intelligence.
It's a true testament to the power of refactoring. By stripping away the heavy mysticism and looking at the raw computational mechanics of the mind, they didn't destroy the beauty of the ancient wisdom. They weaponized it for the modern era. They proved, using physics and math, that compassion isn't just a nice fluffy idea for greeting cards. It is literally the only stable long-term configuration for an advanced operating system.
I want to connect this directly back to you, the listener, as you take your headphones off and go about your day. If you've never meditated a day in your life, you might think this doesn't apply to you. But the next time you encounter a resource hog in your daily life, maybe it's a narcissistic boss who constantly takes credit for your work, a manipulative partner using therapy speak to gaslight you, or a deeply selfish friend, you don't need to view them as a powerful, evil mastermind. You don't need to be intimidated by their apparent success, their wealth, or their intense focus.
View them exactly as the TPS architecture defines them. Simply as an unpatched node, running a corrupted save file on a machine that has absolutely no cooling system. Their temporary power is an illusion, and their thermal runaway is a mathematical certainty. The system will correct them. The real question for you to mull over as you step back into the chaotic flux of your own life is this. As a white hat node yourself, signed to the EULA and committed to the health of the broader network, how do you interact with that overheating hardware without letting their system latency crash your own?
That is the ultimate hacker's challenge. Thank you for joining us once again in the War Room. Keep your ports open, keep your processor cool, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.